Now it's 10 a.m. and we're live. And thank you so much. All right, Brad and Quinn, and everyone out there, welcome to Great Data Products. This is our live stream webinar podcast thing about the craft and ergonomics of data. It's brought to you by Source Cooperative. We'll be talking about Source Cooperative a bit today, which is exciting. One quick bit of housekeeping before we start. Another thing that we do at Radiant Earth is the CNG Forum. And just yesterday, we published a blog post about the upcoming event that's happening in October. Early bird tickets are still available, and there are opportunities to sponsor, submit a talk, do a workshop. Brad and Quinn, I believe, both spoke at the first one last year, so they can attest it's a great event. But anyway, I'll put a link in the chat and in the show notes. It's a great event, and you don't want to miss it. I think it is becoming very quickly the conference of choice for data professionals. So today we're joined by Brad Andrick and Quinn Coiter. Guys should have figured this out. Cuter? Kiter. Wow. Two strikes. Okay. Who we're going to talk about the Storm Events Database Explorer. So before we get into it, do you mind just introducing yourselves? I don't care which order you go in.
Quinn, you want me to go? All right. We talked about this ahead of time that we were just going to shift back and forth, but I'll run with it. Thanks, Jed, for having us. My name is Brad Andrick. I am a software engineer at Earth Genome, where Quinn and I both work. I've been in the game for a little over 12 years. My focus is in digital cartography, geospatial software engineering, been public sector, private sector, now in the nonprofit world, and love it. I can give more of an Earth Genome thing in a minute, but I'll let Quinn give his response.
Yeah. Hey, I'm Quinn Kiter, also an engineer at Earth Genome. My title there is Geospatial Software and Data Engineer, which is the most verbose title I've had, but it is accurate. But basically, I build data pipelines and APIs. And I also dabble in DevOps a bit. So, yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on. This is an exciting one for me because we'd worked a bit. I mean, we actually didn't work that closely on this project or anything like that, but I remember talking to Mikkel about it months ago. And sharing some of my thoughts on this project of an explorer, but also exposing the underlying data in Source Cooperative so that people can do other stuff with it. And so and that's what we're doing. That's always sort of the dream for me, is to have an interface that's accessible by a lot of people and like really beautiful and elegant, but also making sure that people can get under the hood and get the data. So can you talk a little bit more about the project and like the genesis of it and who the audience is and things like that?
Sure. So I'll give the genesis, and Quinn can tell me what I get wrong and what I get right. So the Storm Events database exists as a product of NOAA, and specifically NCEI over in Asheville, the National Center for Environmental Information, I believe it is, puts out this Storm Events database. And in short, the Storm Events database captures storm events that occurred going back to 1950 to today, and it includes some unique things inside of it. So those will be an event type. It could be a hurricane, it could be a tornado, wildfires are in there. There's also a data narrative, which is pretty interesting. So it's about the particular event. And then that exists and is put out as a CSV sort of product, as a lot of federal things kind of end up being at some point. And there's a user interface you can search through the database. Therefore, in addition to that, those fields about the storm event itself, there's also the impact that it had. So that can be property damage, as well as deaths and injuries are also recorded inside of that data set. So that's what that data set really is today if you go to NOAA's site itself. Now that's a little bit different than the Storm Events Database Explorer. So the Explorer is kind of our designation on top of that, and the project itself. So what that ended up being is there were some challenges that come up when you have CSVs that you need to download, or those user interfaces where you've got a couple of filters and then you're getting pieces of the data here and there out of it. But a lot of this data is spatial. And so wasn't really a great visualization to capture that. And in general, we thought that there were some value adds. And I should mention the genesis of this project is not Earth Genome, where we didn't decide, hey, we should make this, it's great. It was a coalition to start with, the Internet of Water Coalition. And they had an idea for this project, working with Duke's Nicholas School for the Environment, and then also the Commons, which is another nonprofit that all kind of started working on this project idea and needed some of the technical guns to come in and kind of facilitate actually creating it. And that's where Earth Genome came into the mix to actually build out the tool. I kind of stopped short of saying what the Explorer part of it got into more, but Quinn,
yeah,
I'll let you go a bit.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and we'll get to that. But yeah, I think that this NOAA data set is really unique in that it brings together all these different types of, broadly speaking, weather events. Brad mentioned a few of them. I think there's 55 different event types that are tracked, and it's really more about the sort of narrative elements of these events rather than like the hyper detailed gridded data that you might see, in like NetCDF format, for example. It's not that. It's more about what happened when this event, this tornado or hurricane, like either in a very specific place or across a broad region, what happened. So that the narrative text, like Brad mentioned, is really useful, but also like, how do you take everything from a tropical storm to a wildfire, a hailstorm, and how do you make them all sort of have a similar format? And that's what NOAA and NCI have been able to do. And I really think that the best parts of that are, what were the economic impacts and how were people affected, in terms of safety with fatalities and injuries. I'm not really sure where else you would go for all of that. And so, like Brad said, clearly this data set has a huge amount of potential, or it's just really valuable. But if it's in a CSV, or, you can query it, but you can only see like 1,000 events at a time or whatever, like you're not really going to get all the potential out of it, I don't think. So that's what we tried to do here.
That's great. No, I mean, it's a perfect example of what's possible now. It's just over the past, not that many years, it's become so easy to see lots of things in the browser and interrogate data that way. And I don't blame anybody for using CSVs. I love CSVs are great. But it's really interesting. I'm sure you have this very lived experience now, having worked with this data, to see if this data goes back to, you said the 1950 or
1950.
Amazing. So you have to imagine sort of the constraints that people were under in terms of how they thought about like what was even possible to share.
And we might get into this, we will get into this a bit more, I'm sure, but that's one of the interesting things about this data set, and like the data discovery portion of this project, is in 1950, it only recorded tornadoes. And so,
oh, really? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
What, Quinn, was it 1995, Quinn? Was the transition 96 was the transition over to a bunch more event types, and there's even more now, of 55, like Quinn mentioned. So working with a data set that for so many years was just tornadoes, and then you've got all of these other event types that come in, making sure that you can visualize in a semi-standardized way both of those different viewpoints over time. It was a really interesting challenge to go through.
Yeah. And I just, to echo the 75 years worth of data, it's just, there's actually some great sort of storytelling on NOAA's websites about the just incredible journey that the data went through, going from like basically typing out documents and filing them in like whatever paper filing archives they had to whatever was the database of choice in 1980, like, and then just the rapid acceleration of different developments in our space, and now here we are. Like, that's, I think, nothing short of heroic to shepherd a data set through all of that time. So, we're just,
Absolutely.
yeah, we're lucky that we get to to be on the tail, at this point, and to get to explore this data and try to make it come to life. Yeah, that was really fun, and that's what we're here to talk about.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. I mean, it's for me, just because I have some biases here. I'm very excited to see the data in source, and in particular that you all created a Parquet file. And I'm going to pull up. I have the link here. I'll also put it in the chat. But that you can now see. I mean, that's kind of a janky URL, I guess, to share in the chat. I don't know if people are going to be able to go to that. That loads up really quickly. Over 2 million rows of data. You can sort. I mean, it's for people who don't know like how Parquet works. The sorting experience might be a little bit strange because it streams in data. So like the different columns will come in. But one of the first things I did when you put up this Parquet file was go and look like just sort by number of deaths. It's like, what is the most kind of like morbid, intriguing statistic there? And it's Katrina. Katrina shows up and there's a narrative about it, and it's fascinating to think that we can just, I mean, I don't remember anymore the limit that Excel has on, it was something 60 something thousand rows, where when I was in grad school, I'd always be frustrated, like, well, you get a CSV or some sort of file and you just can't open it. And now we're at this point where it's like, oh, you just send somebody a URL and they can see all this data. And it's, if you think about what would it imagine 2 million records in 1950, how they would have thought about that. A 2 million page book, a 2 million card catalog or something like that. Like,
yeah, it's yeah, and the fact that the queries that you can do on it on a Parquet file like this are basically only limited by what are the columns there, and then how much SQL do you want to learn. Now you probably don't have to really learn hardly any SQL at all. You could just have an LLM write it for you. But yeah, and then the queries are really fast. So yeah, I'm glad that you're excited about that, Jed. It is just one sort of mode of access that we've built into this product. And I think that this product is sort of exemplary of a lot of what we do at Earth Genome, where we try to create as many modes of access as possible, because naturally someone's first impression of the data is probably going to be going to like the first URL that you shared, the Storm Events Internet of Water app. They want to see what it looks like, but then they might really love CSVs. We have those. They might want to access an API programmatically. They can do that. Or I'm hoping that they'll be like you and they'll be excited to try out these Parquet files.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, let me ask though, like, who are these sort of personas? I'm curious to know like what sort of thought goes into creating a product like the Explorer, and who it's for, and how it's going to be put in front of people, and who those people might be.
Yeah, so part of the process that we go through for most of our projects, and in some ways this process I think will be changing. Maybe a bigger discussion on like what that looks like for the industry, but we always engage with our users as much as we can. So we started with a user survey. There was some initial work before we actually got handed the project to think about people who are in the space already, to think about, okay, what would make this better. And after reviewing that, we also went out to the wider team at the Internet of Water and said, hey, we want to talk going to send out a survey basically to more people. And so we did. We created a survey with 20 different questions, user background, their current workflow through the existing Storm Events database, their pain points and challenges, preferences for new features, and then any like final overarching thoughts. And these covered, with the people that it got sent out to, we had meteorology, climatology wrapped up in there by a few different people, emergency management, kind of disaster preparedness folks. There was insurance in there as well, real estate, and that's running some energy policy, I think might have been in the mix as well. So that's, when we kind of think about those users, that's roughly the mix of people. So it spans scientists to someone in the insurance industry thinking about risk, or a local government that's planning for, hey, this area had this much impact of disaster and this was the cost for it, right? We need to understand that risk, plan for finances and all those sorts of things.
Yeah. Brad, did you mention local government planners? I think that was one on our list of like target users, and I think that represents like a segment that is maybe this would be especially useful as a product for people who need this type of data, but maybe they don't have like an army of data scientists like an insurance company might have to build some detailed model. But if you're you a mid-sized city or a small city and you just need to quickly access weather event narrative data, like I'm hoping that people will hear about this so that they could be like, yeah, now I just go here and it's just that easy. So I think that like, especially the people who don't have the resources or expertise, I'm hoping it gets to them.
Right. Yeah, no, that's, I mean, that kind of persona of somebody who they don't know how to write a SQL query. They don't know what SQL is. And this is also, it's a fascinating data set because it's the kind of thing where like, it's the sort of thing that I think a lot of people imagine does exist or should exist, like, oh yeah, so certainly somebody has a data set of all the storms, but like to find that and then to be able to like, as you all were saying before, query in any sort of useful way by geography or interact with it was just too much of a lift for a lot of people. So this Explorer, hopefully, people will find it. I am curious to know though, like, this might not be your part of your job description, but do you know of like, are there plans to like get it into classrooms or train people on it or make sure people know about it?
I don't know of anything like that. I would love for that to happen. So we did the last step of the project cycle, which right now we're kind of moved into maintenance mode. So we run updates. Quinn runs updates on the project, to keep the data up to date. But that's kind of where things live right now. The last step though, before we kind of moved into that mode, was like communication in a way, which was mostly blog post. So the Commons wrote a blog post or a case study. We did a blog post kind of outlining our process. Then there was a webinar run by the Internet of Water Coalition that Quinn and I were on and kind of gave the walk through the tool. Like 20 or 30 people, I think, were on that at the high point. And then finally, there also was a talk at Phos4G North America this year up in Reston. That kind of outlined a little bit more of the technical details, but still brought up the project. But that's kind of where that project term ended right now.
Yeah. Well, that's, this is interesting. I mean, I'm not like, I don't want to like put anybody on the spot, but like, that's a tricky thing with a lot of these things is that we're at this point where it's like, it's kind of cheap to create something like this. Then but it's a living thing, presumably, that needs to be stewarded for a long time. So anyway, this is a plea to the funders listening in. Like, you should continue to fund these kinds of things and make sure that like we can drive usage of them. I'm curious to know what's NCEI's involvement in here, other than just like kind of being where the data comes from. Are they at the table?
Not really, which is interesting. I've reflected on that myself. I'm like, that's interesting. So I know when with the Duke School, they had some people that they worked with directly at NOAA get some opinions and consult on there's categories. So one of the things that's different between the original data set and what you'll find in this product is a categorization. And so that there was a lot of time that went into figuring out where those breaks should be, how we should group things together. And so that had some NOAA consult back and forth. But as far as the NCEI storm events database and anybody that's currently staffed on that project, we didn't really have much of a relationship with them. That said, we've been following along what they're working on. So that includes the data releases. But more than that, there's been an initiative to redo the user interface that currently exists. And it's interesting to follow because the last update that I had heard was from a presentation last summer, midsummer, that talked about a September release of their beta. So if you go to their website, you have to dig a little bit. You can find a beta version. Interestingly, it does not have the map visualization. It has a filter by map feature now, which is very helpful, but it doesn't have a visualization. They're not putting all of the points on a map or anything like that. But that beta version hasn't been released yet. Who knows why? It could be funding, right? We don't know.
Yeah.
That's an assumption, but
it's a weird time.
It's a weird time.
NOAA. Yeah.
But there was a parallel project that after that started, at least our awareness of it started after our project was already underway. And we've finished our development work last September. And yeah, have yet to see that beta go. I did before this call. I was like, let me follow up on that on LinkedIn with the product owner that I saw from the webinar and followed up on LinkedIn just to kind of see. And they were just somewhere giving a presentation about something related to the Storm Events beta that's still underway. So the deadline has passed, but it's still moving somewhere. So that's at least a good sign.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to know. Yeah, it's it's such an interesting data product that NOAA has here, and it's, as I was looking at it, thanks to your Explorer, and also the Parquet file, and just it's fun to be able to go back and look at this old data, and then also to understand that there's certainly there are there's clearly bad data in there, I think, in the sense that I'm pretty sure Katrina didn't, there's no there's direct, sorry, I'm so morbid. I'm I only care about death. It's there's the direct deaths, and then there's indirect, fatalities or whatever. And I think there were 0 for Katrina, which is almost certainly not true. But I guess, did you have to deal with this as you were going through? Certainly fields were added over time, for which there's just no data for historical events. How much of your work got caught up in that kind of stuff?
A few months of work for me alongside other projects that I was working on separate from this. But yeah, I spent quite a bit of time digging into the data, as it's presented by NOAA and NCI, and trying to make sense of where some of those gremlins might be hiding. So I don't have an answer for the why indirect deaths might be undercounted in certain events. On so we have also, the data set has property damage and crop damage. I spent a while looking at that because, one, the way that damage, those damage numbers are presented, it's not just numerical. It's not just $1 million. It's one capital M. It's you have to parse these text fields, and
wow.
So I got that working, and that's all fine. But then in about April or May, our Mikkel Marin, our boss here at Earth Genome, he mentioned the NOAA's $1 billion data set, and because we were wondering, okay, well, that's got property damage information, just like the storm events database has how similar are they? Are the numbers exactly the same? So I spent a little bit of time comparing those numbers, and the $1 billion data set, because I'm assuming that because it's been focused on figuring out the overall economic impact of a large scale event, they probably dialed in the methodology for counting that damage, more precisely than perhaps this storm events data set has. So typically the $1 billion data set numbers are higher, probably because they've done a more complete sort of evaluation. But then it was interesting because then in May, NOAA announced that they were going to retire that $1 billion data set. So that caused some I don't know. I wouldn't say alarm on our part because everything looked fine for the continuity of the storm events database from NOAA, but we just had to wonder, like, is this going to be next? But so far, it's been kept up to date every month, except for during the shutdown. So,
right, yeah, gosh, I mean, it's so it's inevitable that if you look at any kind of data set like this, you're going to get into all these like really interesting questions where you're like, how, you see a number there and it's like, this is how much damage there was. And you're like, well, how do you know? Like what model did you use? And to your point, like you could use whatever model that the economist who runs the $1 billion disaster thing, who by the way, the guy's name is Adam Smith. He's an economist at NOAA, or he used to be, because of presumably Doge or something like that. Not there anymore, but anyway, it's just funny. He's an economist named Adam Smith. I don't know him, but but anyway, like, so he has a model to figure out, like, the what counts as $1 billion disaster, and the point being that, like, whatever number is in those in those cells is like, there's a lot of thinking that has to go behind that's never documented. It's very, very rarely documented. So anyway, it's just I want to make sure that it's clear that I'm not picking on you all if there are issues with the data. It's just one of the sorry, but I want to hear from you, but like, that's kind of why I'm like curious to know if like NCEI is involved, because I think one of the great things about this Explorer is that it should allow for a feedback loop to NCEI, but my guess is that there's no one on the other end of the line.
Yeah. I would love to have that feedback loop too. I in a previous job, I spent 3 years as a contractor at the U.S. Geological Survey, working on the national map and delivering those data products. I found myself on the other end of the line, and it was like, how do we talk to users? Like, I would love to hear, the users of these data products, like, what feedback they have for us. And maybe that was just not in my scope of responsibilities, but I regardless would love to see more of that feedback loop, like you mentioned. Yeah, one specific sort of data quality issue that I wrestled with, and I think where we ended up actually works pretty well, is the location data. In the storm events data set, again, you have 55 different event types. How do you represent where that event happened? Some event types, like a tornado, the database has an actual point location or even a series of points where that tornado happened. But how would you do that for like a heat wave, which is another event type? You can't really use a point location for a heat wave. So there they would make the location would be represented by the county or forecast zone that experienced that heat wave or whatever the event type was. So right there, you've got like two different, a point and a boundary, a polygon. The way that we sort of merge those together is just by taking the centroid of that boundary. But then, so that's fine. But I also found that the way that those boundaries are assigned isn't always. There's some cases where they would say it happened in this state, and here's the FIPS code for the county where it happened. and we've got a NOAA data set of county FIPS codes, and sometimes the FIPS code doesn't line up with any known FIPS code in that state. So what do you do then? Well, there's also names of the name of the county. So I have a little bit of logic in the data ingestion pipeline where it's like, okay, if the FIPS code didn't match up, we'll try the name. But despite that, there's still about 1% of the events where we just try as we might, we could not figure out exactly which county or forecast zone was this event. All we really know is what state it was in. So that's something where I'd be like, oh, I'd love to talk to someone at NCI and say, here are the events that I flagged where I don't have this, this location. Could you try to fix that? And maybe they can't. Maybe that event was 30 years ago, and there's just no way to know. But it'd be nice to have that conversation.
Yeah, things are lost to time. I don't know if you saw. I mean, this is a plug for a talk from the CNG last year, where Drew Brunig. It was the last day, but Drew gave this talk about sort of the origin of railroad time, and how, like, for a really long time, I mean, a really long time, most of human history, we didn't have standardized time. The idea of time zones and being set to Greenwich Mean Time was not a thing. And so you would have to, like, if you showed up in another city, you'd have to, like, find the town clock and be like, okay, this is how they keep the time here. And just what an unlock it was for us to get a standardized way of referring to time, how that enabled commerce and travel and things like that. And we just don't, you're just remaking his point for him. He's like, we need that for place. There is no way to like a common way to refer to a place. There's a FIPS code, their county boundaries and stuff like that, county names, but it can fall apart really easily. And so standardizing that is really important.
Yeah. Well, another thing that I took away from Drew's talk, he said, it wasn't just about railroad time. It was about, well, one of the points he made was it's not enough to just post data, make the data open and just stop there. You have to actually make it easy to use. And so that's where, again, it's like we had an open data set, but here we tried to make it really easy for as many people who would care to use the data. Just give them as many options as possible to easily access it. So, yeah, again, a good plug for the CNG conference in Snowbird next October.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't pay anyone to do this, so thank you, Quinn. Yeah. Actually, yeah, I'll put a link to Drew. So the funny thing about Drew's talk is that we failed to record it at the conference, so we had him redo it, just like as a webinar, and recorded it, and so it's up on YouTube. But yeah, well, I mean, yeah, I'm curious to get your take then on like your kind of ideal user, or like how you'd like to see this data being used more like in the future, if you've given thought into, as you discussed before, like the personas for the explorer, but then also for the data in source. Do you have like any imagination of like who might be doing stuff with the Parquet file or all the CSV files that are there in source?
Yeah, that's, I mean, I would love to just, sort of the LinkedIn crowd that loves to, hey, like I had an idea. And so I spent, 2 hours on Saturday, like digging into this data set that I heard about. Like, one, I would love to just see like people in our community, in the cloud native geospatial community, just sort of engage with this data. I have a bit of a hard time, telling people who their job is not my job. I'm not a researcher. I'm not a insurance underwriter. I don't know that I want to tell them how to, like, you don't do it that way. Use this data set instead. But Yeah. So, Brad, who's your ideal user?
It's a great question to think about, because I think that's one of the problems with, honestly, this sort of project, that we engaged is a great idea, right? And then we have some follow-on ideas too. We also have other projects that we need to work on, right? So like, how does that get picked back up? And for us, it generally would be like, oh, someone has this idea and they cobble together the funding to be able to support that, and that then turns into, one of the many projects that might come back up underneath Quinn or I or somebody else. I think the communication part of that too is something that we need to maybe do more with. ESIP comes to mind. It's a great community to get out and talking with. They just had their conference, their virtual one. I think the next one's out in July. So that's probably the direction to engage more directly, because those are little one-off events that we can hit, try to spread the word. But we are, like many organizations, bound by funding, resources, other projects, and priorities, and those sorts of things. So figuring out where that follow through is and how it happens is maybe a good question to think about.
Yeah. Well, so maybe this is a little anecdote about, for whoever out there is listening, how you could use the data. So I live in Colorado, and in January, when much of the U.S., especially the eastern states, were experiencing severe winter weather, in Colorado, we had like a few inches of snow here in Denver, hardly anything. Daily highs in the 50s and 60s. So I was wondering, like what are the historical winter weather trends, in Colorado and in the U.S. using the Parquet file and some queries against that. You can use the data set to find out very quickly. January is the top calendar month for winter weather events in the U.S. And that's in terms of the number of events, the fatalities and injuries, and the economic damage. But in Colorado, again, just a different query. It's actually March and April that have the highest economic impacts in terms of winter weather. And to me, that was no surprise, because typically we're patient about seeing large snowstorms. We know they're not going to come until April or March, and that as a consequence, that's apparently when they wreak the most havoc in terms of economic damage. So that was an easy, that took me maybe 15 minutes to figure that out. But yeah, but I think that there is a sort of open question that I'm glad we're talking to you, Jed. Like, I think all three of us we love the idea of data products. We sort of inherently see and have a visceral feeling of the value of these data, but like, it really depends on someone also getting that feeling. So like, how do you market a data product? And yeah, what have you learned from
Sure.
trying to do that?
Well, I mean, that is the whole point of this podcast, is to sort of explore these questions in public. One is like having a name, and I mean, and even like a name like the like National Storm Events Database or something like that, like is fine. Like, Landsat is one that I always use because it has like a brand name, and my hilarious joke about Landsat, and this is true, is that like I'd been working with Landsat for like at least 5 years before I realized it stood for land satellite. I was like, oh, land satellite. This is not obvious to me, but like, but like just even thinking of it in terms of a product is really important. So like, yes, you have to give it a name, that makes sense to people, and then it's good. We have a comment from Akis on YouTube asking just like, how do you market data products? It's kind of like any other product. You just have to figure out like how to explain its value proposition, make sure that people know about it. You get awareness, talk about it a lot. you know? And it's the kind of thing that like our world of like nonprofit people tend to ignore entirely, which is like it it is sales. You know, it's like very kind of like it's like you gotta like find channels. You know, this is what like salespeople like to talk about, or like channels, like which is like how are you going to get your message out to a lot of people at once and make sure that they're the people that you want. And yeah, I think our community, this again, this is why we started the podcast and like try to elevate this conversation, is we don't talk about this kind of stuff enough. There's another it's interesting dimension though in 2026, you know, and has been for the past few years, which is that a lot of users of data aren't going to be people. You know, they'll be agents and things like that. And so I'm curious, do you all think about that at Earth Genome now? Making data AI ready or whatever?
Well, I have another anecdote. So the relevant here, the Parquet, I really relied on a project that Chris Holmes is, you know, it's a Chris Holmes project. I know that he has collaborators on this tool called GeoParquet IO. So when I was trying to figure out how do I write these Parquet files? What's the best way to do this? You know, in January 2026, and the LLM that I was talking to, you know, referred me to Chris Holmes's GeoParquet IO project. And when I went to
Nice.
look at it, you know, I looked at the GitHub, and it's like this has only been like really live for like a week. You know, this is in
Yeah,
January.
it's like brand new. Yeah.
Yeah. So somehow like Chris Holmes has figured out how to market, you know, his stuff to AI so that it can be marketed back to us. Um, yeah, that's I thought that was fun.
That is crazy.
I think he leaned into using like Claude skills definition. They're just markdown files that explain to an agent, here's how you could use this, you know, this library. So that maybe that is what got that to work.
Maybe. Yeah, okay, I have an email in my inbox I need to get back to on Chris on, and I'm going to ask him. But yeah, I mean, I've been aware of this project. I'm very surprised to hear you mention it because I've been aware of this project. There's another guy named Nissim Libovitz, I think, who, you know, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, who's also been leading on this. It is like brand new. So that's awesome. I mean, that's crazy. That's a really interesting anecdote about like how like AI or, you know, Claude or, you know, I guess you're using Claude that was aware of, or was it?
I wasn't. I think I was using, I don't know, Gemini maybe or something like that.
Okay, interesting. But regardless, like that, like right away, the models have been able to figure out other stuff that people have been working on that would be relevant to you. So anyway, it's just like a model helping sort of matchmake among humans, which is crazy. Um, that's super cool. Yeah, but yeah, everybody check out geoparquet.io. Um, Brad, I'm going to put you on the spot. I mean, what have you been thinking about the rise of agents as data users as well?
Bit, but if I could, I'd go back to the marketing question for a second.
Sure, please.
So I think why it matters is really important. So, and I think about why this data set matters from NOAA. And if you look at it, we're talking about who's our persona, and that's important. But also, what is the overall impact potential of this data set? And to me, it's potentially where billions in resilience funding and infrastructure investment must go. Like it can dictate that level of like direction of things. How many people that have that level of influence are looking at this data set or aware of this data set or using a report that maybe is rolled up 5 levels and there's no like actual tie back to the data set? And it also goes to a lot of open data gets lost out there. I think of whether I spent a year working for a local government, we had a brilliant open data portal. And It wasn't just an Esri open data portal, although there's plenty of those out there in local government. And that's great for local resources. But then how do you search 15,000 local government open data portals to find what you need, right? There's that next step of everything else. And then also the marketing ties in there on who's responsible for the marketing, because a lot of those people building the open data stuff, they're not marketing, they're not sales, and there might not be any budget at all for that stuff. So either you're going to kind of what we do, we go to a conference and talk about the work. Great, we got it out there. We go on a webinar, we talk about the work. All right, here it is. There you go. But where is that gap, and how does that get filled? I don't have a great answer to that.
Yeah. Well, and so this is a message that, this is our message also kind of like to policymakers or people who are writing open data policy, or otherwise, like, funding open data programs, is that we've got to get ourselves out of this idea that like you just open up the data and it's fine and good and you're done. It's like, well, no, like, what are you doing this for? Who are you doing it for? Are you sure you're reaching them? Do you have any way of knowing whether or not it's useful? To your point, Brad, that none of that stuff is funded. It's all, just kind of just throw some CSVs up on the internet and be like, all right, our job is done here. And it's like nothing else. No other like media production operation behaves that way, where we're just going to put stuff out there to see what happens. So anyhow, it is a gap. I mean, and that's why we're working this stuff out, like I said before, in public. I want to point out that Akis again said that he was very interested in knowing more about the user stories. So if there, I don't know if there's any way, if you all have shared already, or like any sort of information about the sort of the background of the project. I shared the Commons blog post, but I don't know what else would be out there.
Yeah, so the Commons blog, that's a great one because that's framed as a case study, and that gives a good amount of the background. There's maybe a little bit more on the discovery and the process one that has some screenshots that talk about some of those categories that we targeted.
Okay.
That's on the earthgenome.org/about.
Okay.
Or /blog, and then you'll find the one for the storm events. I think it's the first one still because it's the most recent, maybe. That has a few more details in it. As far as that is like a process, I can speak a little bit to that more generally, that we sometimes target and we do all the work to build a persona and do like the traditional design thing where we have a persona mocked up and these are their skill sets and this is their description and these are their pain points and those sorts of things to get one or two of those generalized personas built out. We did not do that specific exercise for this project. There was some more general work when we got on the project, and then there was the user survey. And then from that, we landed on a requirements list that went back and forth between our team, the Internet of Water team, and the Duke School to basically refine that down, say, hey, this is how much budget, this is all the requirements that we'd love to have in there. These are the most important ones ranked by the user survey that we got back from, did an analysis on that, and then kind of decided, okay, this is where the project needs to live.
Got it. Okay. Fascinating. Yeah. But then once again, it's like, there's a project that needs to live. I think there's a lot, that word live is doing a lot of heavy lifting. It's like for this thing to, sorry, this would be a little cheesy, like to come to life, it needs to live in people's minds. People need to be aware of it. Akis left another comment on YouTube. It's like, if people can't find it, it doesn't exist. It's irrelevant if it's just sitting out there and no one knows about it.
100%. And when we joined this project, we did that kind of discovery phase, one, to talk to users, but also we Googled NOAA storm events database and see what popped up. And there was a ArcGIS dashboard, not a story map, but a dashboard kind of interface that existed at some point up to a moment in time. And then the data was never updated. And that just went away.
Here we are. Well, this is the other I think this, talking about like NOAA providing a better interface to this is interesting. So, it's possible that this beta comes out and then it just becomes, moves into production, and then what you've created is made obsolete by it. And that's fine. That is probably like a perfectly fine outcome. But it also sort of reveals this interesting, I think it's an interesting challenge, which is that like, especially in the context of data products, is that you have the data product, and our concept of that on Source is it's a collection of objects. And in fact, the story you've told about this data product explains sort of why that's really important to us, is that we take an object, or what some people might say a file-based approach, which is that if you did have a bunch of paper records of storms, on a ledger or cards or something like that, that's kind of timeless, like it's not locked up in anything. It's just, they're paper records. Of course, those are expensive to preserve and maintain and stuff like that. So as we move into digital things, for a long time, we've been, I would say, beset by database people who I love. Some of my best friends are database people, but they're like, oh no, this needs to be like, put into a database for all these obvious benefits. And we're like, well, yeah, sort of, except it does start to impinge upon accessibility and portability, or it can, depending on what kind of database you use. And we're just like, no, like I want us to keep a file-based approach, just because it feels more timeless, right? And it can live anywhere. So we think of products as like a collection of objects. And so in the case of what you publish on Source, it's all the CSVs and this Parquet file. I would say if NOAA could only do anything, it should just do that and then get out of the way, because it allows people like you to build tools like, your Explorer much more easily. But very few government agencies can get away with that. They can't be like, here's a Parquet file, good luck. Like, there's an executive somewhere that wants to have a dashboard, and that's fine. But all of those dashboards and visualizations are expensive. Oh, go ahead, Quinn. Sorry.
They have a need to market themselves, market their data, and yeah, if it's just a CSV file, yeah, they're going to want to go a step beyond. But yeah, your conversation with Denise Ross, I think she made that point about, it's really essential that if a data set can only be produced by a government, they need to make the care and feeding of that data set their priority. They need to protect whatever it takes to keep collecting it, because that continuity is more valuable than, a user interface, because, then as long as the data is open, then, anyone else outside of the government, like us, we're those people, can come along and build and innovate on that open data. So I was glad that she said that, because I hadn't heard anyone articulate that before. But it's like, yeah, okay, yeah, I think we need to say that more often, rather than just be passive consumers of public data.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we should. Everyone knows Denise is very good. That conversation is like really great. I need to go back and re-listen to it, because there's some just amazing gems in there, and we've gotten feedback on that one. But yeah, I think I haven't said it explicitly. I've been thinking this whole conversation, been thinking about what she and I talked about, the lack of feedback loops. This is why I was asking, like, is NCEI at the table? Is there anybody there at the table? And Brad, like you said it, that kind of work, that sort of like consumer, customer engagement, front facing type work is just very, very, very rarely funded. And it's a problem, because it does, you almost have no choice but to be a passive consumer, because there's just like no way to actually like interact with the provider of the data in many cases. Go ahead, Quinn. Were you gonna say something? Okay, sorry. Okay. Well, we're reaching the end of the hour. So I'm gonna say this. We want people to submit talks for CNG 2026, but we're going to be, one bit of feedback we got from last year is we had too many sessions that were very good and people just couldn't choose. So we're gonna have fewer sessions. We're just gonna like be a bit more picky. So I encourage you all, Earth Genome, or either of you to submit stuff. You don't have to say what you're to submit about, but and also anybody listening as well. But yeah,
Quinn and I have already talked. Yeah, we've got ideas, but it's kind of like which one, since it seems like a more focused effort this time, which idea do we pull the gun on and submit for? So
okay, well, here a clue is like we want end users, we want like impact. This is sort of a problem our community has, is that we are very geeky and we'll geek out on talking about file formats and stuff like that and technical specs, but we want to talk about actual use, like end user impact.
Yeah. Well, and Jed, I appreciate your encouragement and the comments on YouTube. Also, the implicit encouragement there to keep talking about these valuable data sets and not just like post it and forget it, but continue those conversations, because that's how I think that's how their value can actually be fully realized. That's one of the goals for this year. Just keep talking about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's I've got another email in my inbox about this, and Akas just left another comment. How would this work and get funded at the open data product level? Is like that's kind of the point. Is like you have to think in terms of products to defend these things. Is to say like the other email I have in my inbox is about like, hey, how do we prioritize which data sets from the government are at risk? And this conversation has been going on for like a solid well over a year now, ever since Trump came back into office and things started going a little haywire. People are like, oh, what are our most important data assets? And people kind of don't know. There's just like data here and there, but because the data hasn't ever been conceptualized as a product that has users, and you have an understanding of how much it like costs to maintain that product, these conversations are super hard. And so, yeah, I mean, so Akas, my response to Akas here is like, that's the whole point of referring to data products as products, is because you have to fund them discreetly, or at least think about defending them at an individual product level. And eventually the way it should be and the way it is like NOAA has a portfolio of products, and that they're stewards of, and they might have to confront a time where it's like, what, this product, no one uses it, nobody cares about it, it's time to let it go.
Yeah. Well, just to be clear, for anyone who wants to know, our plan for the Storm Events Database Explorer is to sync the data with NOAA's data every month through, I think, at least October of this year, probably longer. It's actually very easy to do that. Did it last season, no big deal. And so this will be a resource. It's not like we just did this once and we're stopping. It's going to continue to be updated as long as NOAA keeps updating their data.
Great. Well, and actually, I failed to ask this before, but like, what is the application itself? What kind of application is this? I imagine this is also a pretty modern web app that's very lightweight.
Yeah, it's the React front end. Mapbox is the map rendering library in there. It's fast. It works on a mobile app. We're responsive. It's pretty lightweight overall. I don't know if the FOSS4G talks from this year are recorded or if they'll be out at some point, but there was one there that went into more detail on some of the fun behind the scenes database work that Quinn helped with, and using pgtileserve and deciding not to use pgtileserve and going back to GeoJSON for the data aggregation component of it. I could talk for way long here about the decision of a dot grid as a data aggregation type over H3 or something else. Okay. So it was a great, I love, it's for like the place I love to live, digital cartography land. But it's pretty lightweight, and kind of to circle back to the agent question that I avoided in a way,
sure.
was you made a comment that I think is very true, that we've had a bit of a sea change where it is a lot easier to get things done faster, at least to that prototype. We talk about this a lot internally right now on what does that design process look like for us? Are we iterating in code now? Because it used to be code's expensive. You do that last. Well, that's kind of changing in the landscape, at least for the prototype stage. But as far as Noah putting the data out there and just being like, here's the endpoint, like scripting down those CSVs, I don't like. Quinn did a lot of work to do that, but these days it's not too wild to script those and pull them down. Right now, the cleaning up portion, that's where a lot of the thought work went into. But like the action of pulling down all of the data and then throwing it into a database, like there's work to get there to get it to work at scale, and we're at 2 million over that now events in the database. So that starts to be like an annoying. It's not big data, but it's big enough to be annoying that you need to consider aggregation methods and all those things, and multiple filters being combined, and dynamic querying and all of that. But anyway, I think there is maybe a world going ahead where that sort of interface is, you can spin it up much more quickly, make these tweaks here and there in much more of an open and collaborative and easy to access for people way.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I think this is the great future that we live in. I mean, I'm a broken record on this. Like, it gets cheaper to do this stuff every day. Like every day, it's cheaper and easier to build a tool like this. And yeah, we live in a future where I can send somebody a URL and they can interrogate 2 million rows of data, like in a browser anywhere in the world. Like, that's awesome. What to me, like the lesson from that is like, well, then we need to be investing in making sure that the data itself is really high quality and keeps being produced, at the core. So that anybody can build on top of it. All right. Well, so any last words before we wrap it up? Anything you want our audience to know about or look at? We'll share, of course, links to all of your work in the show notes and stuff like that. But
for anybody that does follow our work on Earth Index, that's something we've been doing.
Yeah.
Searching embeddings. That we've got some interesting things coming out that we went through a Google GenAI, Google.org GenAI Accelerator, and so that was an interesting learning experience. And we have some even features past that coming out later this year, so there'll be some interesting things there to watch. And then I just will plug again CNG. Everybody should go to I said to Jed before, this is the conference when I'm at places, I tell people go to this conference. It's like if you took all the technical people, and hopefully this won't offend you, Jed, because you just said you're trying to shift this up, but you took all the technical people out of the FOSS4G world and put them in a room, and it's just the geospatial nerds that are also talking about the bigger, wider. There was some great sessions in the like business kind of side of things last year, and how do we open data sustainably longer term, and funding models. So it was great. I love it, and I'm going to be back this year. Everybody
awesome.
should.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah, I mean, look, you said it better than I could, and nobody needs to hear it from me. I agree that our conference is awesome, but listen to Brad. All right. Well, thank you both.